and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. As you can see, I've gone back to using my proper camera as a recording device because when I was editing, looking at the computer webcam, it was just killing me. It is very warm and humid today, and I've got a heating pad on my back, and I have to turn all the fans off so that you don't catch the noise. So if I become dewy as the episode goes on, that's why. If you're a returning viewer, it's so nice to see you again, and if you're a new viewer, I'm really glad that you found your way to my little corner of the internet. Thistle is here with me. I'm sitting in a big enough chair for her today. Here, I'll pop her up on my lap so you guys can see her for a while at least. Segments today are going to include works in progress, finished objects, Schrodinger sweater, which I never say correctly. Let's see, I'll review some yarn, and I'm going to talk a little bit about dyeing yarn as well. So, should be a nice full episode, even though I haven't made a ton of progress on big projects. So we'll do finished objects first, and they are two more softies. I seem to really get in these moods where I'm happy to knit little stuffed animals, and since everyone seems to be happy to receive them as gifts when I'm in a mood like that, then I just knit away, and then I don't worry about it until the next time I'm in that kind of mood. So, first one is one that I don't have to show you. I forgot to even take pictures, but I knit a convertible turtle for a little girl I know. I was going to her 5th birthday party, and I just think that's such a fun pattern. You can see a video of it on Instagram, but it's using Susan B. Anderson's free pattern, and you can see the details on my project page. But since I forgot to take photos, I can't even insert them. Maybe I'll figure out how to insert the video from my phone. Never tried that before. But yeah, so that was fun and went over well. Next up, I knit a little cat. And I knit this using another free pattern, this one by Sarah Elizabeth Kellner. I like it best from the back. Anyway, who did the songbird pattern that I used for the Softie last week. And this was another thank you gift for a friend. He requested a cat, and he has a ginger cat of his own. I didn't have any orange yarn in my stash, so I dyed some cream yarn, and I tried to make it as variegated as possible in order to look more like a ginger tabby, and I'm pretty pleased with how it came out. And I also held it double while knitting, although what I should have done, because I was thinking, oh, if I hold it double, that'll increase the variation. But I wound them both the same way, and I should have wound them opposite ways if I wanted to increase the variation. But I'll talk more about that dyeing later. As for the pattern, as I said, I really like it from the back. I like how you can make a little loaf kitty and make it cute like that. I had issues with the face. Luckily, his cat has green eyes, and that was the cat size, or cat pupil safety eyes that I had in this size. And the rain is picking up again. Hopefully I can edit that out. If not, I apologize. I cannot control the weather, sadly. Anyway, to me, the face looks a little bit more like a gargoyle than a cat. And I fussed with this for a long time because the pattern has the face completely flat, and then you embroider some eyes and a nose, but I wanted a three-dimensional face, so I just did some tucks with yarn to get the little muzzle going, and then I did tucks next to the eyeballs to make them recede a little, but I don't know. Hopefully my friend will like it, but I think I would use, the pattern is knit body first and then head. I also think the head looks a little small compared to the body. Anyway, so I would use the body pattern again, but I would do a head from a different pattern. And the final softie is a larger one that I just finished this morning, and this is Brunhilde the gnome, named by my friend Kristen, who is the lucky adopter. And she's a little darker. I have the exposure bumped up one, but maybe I should bump it back down. Anyway, I love how she came out. So I knit her using a brand new gnome pattern from Sarah of Imagine Landscapes. and it is called Here We Gnome Again, which I think is really funny. And this time she incorporated twisted stitches, which, if you've been watching my podcast, you know how much I love those. So those are just micro cables that you cable every round. And then on the body there are some as well. Oh, there we go. That's true to the color. So I used Barocco Ultra Alpaca, worsted weight in the Azure Mix colorway. Yeah, that's the true color. Isn't it a pretty blue? Because Kristen wanted a blue gnome. And I actually started this in fingering weight, but the yarn I was using didn't show off the cables very well. And I also felt that if I was going to be doing that kind of more fiddly cabling, it would be nice to show it off on a bigger scale. So she's a nice size. So I went ahead and went with worsted weight, and the pattern actually says you'll need 100 yards of worsted weight, although that does include a 15% buffer. So it's a bit tricky with scrap yarn. For my stash at least, I have a lot more fingering weight than worsted weight scraps, but I have a whole bunch of this yarn left over from when I bought it, deluding myself into thinking I would knit a blanket for my niece who lives in South Texas out of a yarn that's 50% wool and 50% alpaca. I don't know. It was when I was a new knitter, and it was like my first online purchase, and I got seduced by the sales on webs. Anyway, moving on. I've used it for various things. It's fine. It'll get knit up. So it did use 80 yards. And just for future scrap busting, the top of the hat used 20, or not the top, the hat used 20 grams. The body and arms used 17. And then the pom-pom used 2 grams, one of the blue and one of the white. The white is just leftover woodland from Classic Elite yarn. I thought that the cream looked better than the bright whites that I had. It's being blown out again. And neither of these yarns are really designed to show off twisted stitches or cables to the max, because the main yarn, it doesn't have a super high twist, and it's half alpaca, so it has more drape than a regular wool, and the heathered color makes the stitches blend in a little more, and then this just isn't a very bouncy yarn. But I still think she looks great, and even if her cables aren't as high relief as the ones that Sarah uses for her pattern designs, where she picked really great, bouncy, multiple ply, I think merino yarns, high twist, to really make the cables pop. Like any of the Quince wool line, these would look amazing in. But what was I saying? Oh, but I still think they look great. And then you really get the detail of the body cable on the back. This was a really cleverly designed pattern. I loved the way the decreases work with the beard and the way the cable incorporates that increase in the back. It's beautifully done. And then the hat with the decreases. And it's both fully charted and fully written, and the pattern gives you various notes for things to look out for, which Sarah writes very thorough and comprehensive patterns, judging from this and her other gnome pattern. The only modification I did was a very minor one. I did not have pellets, which is what she recommends using for the body, so I stuffed it with polyfill, but then it wanted to fall over because there's polyfill in the hat too. So I added 10 nickels right here, and that makes her balance really nicely. You do have to kind of mush her a little bit sometimes when you set her down, but that's okay. And I like that. The nice thing about 50% alpaca is the hat drapes really well. So since there's a lot of hat, I like that you can kind of mess around with it. I had fun doing a little photo series for Instagram today, if you're interested in seeing that. And yeah, I'm incredibly delighted with how she turned out. I think the details are beautiful, and this is the kind of thing that I would knit as a gift when I wanted to sort of impress someone, because I just think it's absolutely beautiful. I love the original one, which I also have, the Never Not Gnoming pattern. It's great for using up scraps and for when you just want to give someone a little pick-me-up, basically, or just a little creature. I think those are wonderful too. But to me, this one is the like, ooh, I need to impress someone, or I'm giving a gift to a crafter, something like that. Kristen, my friend, does do crafting as well. This feels like a knitter's gnome to me because of all the lovely little details. And I really like the scale at worsted weight. Let's see, here is a 50-gram ball of Knit Pick Stroll for comparison. I didn't check my gauge, but I think I was pretty well spot on. Usually I'm a loose knitter, but in worsted weight it calls for 18.5 stitches to 4 inches in stockinette, so that's quite a large gauge. And yeah, I'm incredibly pleased with her. I can't wait to give her to Kristen. For the pom-pom, I used the Clover pom-pom makers that a kind viewer sent me, and I was really excited because I got to use the pink one, which is the smallest one, and I hadn't used it before, and I love it so much, the little baby pom-pom. I think I need to knit a pair of mittens and put pom-poms at the cuff. I think that would be wonderful. So I'm going to start another recording on the camera. I'm going to let Thistle go over to the couch because she wants her water bowl and she's not allowed to jump up and down off furniture anymore. In case you don't know, she injured her spine back in February, so we're being more careful now. And yeah, maybe adjust the exposure a little, but I'll be back in a minute. That looks better. I'm sitting closer to the window now because I'm also closer to the camera, so I think I had the old exposure settings on, so sorry that that was a little blown out. Here are Brunhilde and the little window cat again, just now that it's a more normal lighting. And I think I will talk about dyeing yarn before I go on to my works in progress, just because that's a little bit of variety. So, first, there's the orange yarn, and you might be able to see that these are not the same, even though this is the yarn that I dyed. First of all, this is not how yarn normally looks when I dye it. All 3 of the skeins I'm going to show you are from yarn that was sent to me by a kind viewer, and they're Bartlett yarns. And I really love how they work in Softies. They're a very kind of traditional feeling 2-ply, and they're very sturdy and they hold their shape really well. So it's really fun. You can kind of move the Softies around a little and that kind of thing. And since this was cream, I thought it would be really great for making an orange tabby cat yarn because, you know, they're not super orange. So I didn't want to start with a colored yarn and over dye it because that always darkens it. And at least Mr. Cat, who is the name of my friend's cat, is definitely a paler orange. So I just assumed it. So this was in a skein, and I just assumed it was tied off. So that's why it's this craziness. That's not, I'll show you the other ones in a minute. But a few people have asked about my dyeing method, and I love to dye yarn, but I do it in a very slapdash manner. It's not at all the way that I knit, which is probably why I enjoy it. It gives me a break. So I only use food-safe dyes. I use Kool-Aid, and then I have 2 colors of Wilton's food icing dye. I have sky blue and goldenrod yellow, one of their yellows. And I bought both of those for like $5 maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm still using them. A little goes a long way. Although it's not like I dye massive amounts of yarn. Anyway, so I started with a very pale peach color. So I mixed up some orange, and then I added, so I took cherry Kool-Aid and I mixed it with the Wilton's yellow to get an orange. And then I wanted it to be a little bit more complex, so I added just a tiny amount of the blue Wilton's icing dye because that's the complement of orange. That means it's opposite on the color wheel, and so if you add a little bit of a complement to a color, it tones it down. Instead of being very bright, it just becomes a little more muted. And if you go far enough, then you end up with a gray or a brown, but I didn't go that far. And I didn't mix up a ton of dye. I'm not going to be able to give you ratios because I just kind of, I don't know, do it by ear. And since I had used, so Kool-Aid has citric acid in it, so you don't even have to add anything to make the dye stick to the yarn, assuming you're using a wool yarn. I think any animal fibers, I think silk too. And then, but the Wilton's icing dye, you just throw some vinegar in. So I added a little bit of white vinegar. And meanwhile, I had taken my big stock pot and filled it full of water and thrown all the yarn in and just pushed it down to make sure it was in the water and put that on the stove. And I put the burner on a medium heat and brought the temperature of the water up. So once it was hot, I had boiled my kettle and I made the Kool-Aid icing mix. And I also added vinegar instead of to the dye in the measuring cup. I added it to the soup pot because at this point I wanted the yarn to not be super uneven. So that way the yarn got soaked in the vinegar and that helps it absorb more quickly. So I took that first batch and I poured it in, but I purposely poured it on like just in certain sections of the skein, and so that meant that those sections of yarn got a little more dye than the others and absorbed a little more quickly, especially reds I find tend to absorb really quickly, but the water still turned orange, and then I let that sit. I just turned the burner off and let it sit until the water was clear because that meant all the dye had been picked up. And so that gave me a peach, but it was an even paler peach than this, and so I wasn't sure yet if that was going to be my final color, but meanwhile I wanted this darker color. So I mixed up another batch of orange dye, only this time I used more Kool-Aid and more of the Wilton's icing so that the dye was more concentrated and would be darker. And I did the same thing where I added a splash of, well, a touch of blue. What I actually do, because the Wilton's icing containers are these small little things, I dip a fork in, and whatever sticks to the tines is what I stir into the measuring cup when I just want a little. And then for that one, that's when I went ahead and I poured off some of the water that had been in the soup pot so that the yarn was in a little less water, and then I poured the dye in the same way. So I was pouring it on specific areas, and they picked up the dye more, so they became the dark areas. And then as the dye dispersed, it dyed the rest of it. And that was almost there, but I decided I needed the base color to be a little bit lighter. A little bit darker. So I went ahead and mixed up a little bit more orange and just threw that in the way that I had the first round and just let it sit, and this was the result. So as you can see, I very much work by trial and error. I only dye when I'm going to be home and I can just mess with it. The key I have found is training myself to not stir the yarn, which especially since this one wasn't tied off, that could have gotten bad quickly. In fact, once I let it dry, I just kind of looked at it and I was like, how am I ever going to wind this? But luckily, I just set it in my lap and started winding with a little ball, and I could follow the way the yarn went, and it wasn't super tangled. So hopefully that works again since I've dyed up the rest of it. But usually you tie your skeins so that they don't become a mess. But yeah, so over time I've learned to stir as little as possible. My stock pot has like a steamer pot in it, and so I use that, and I put the yarn in that, and that way when it has absorbed all the dye and I want to take it out, I can just lift the steamer pot out, and then I've got just a regular soup bowl upside down in my sink, and I put the steamer pot on top of the soup bowl, and then all that water just drains. And I don't have to disturb the yarn at all until first it's cooler, so it helps my hands, and if you can hear Thistle's barking a little in her sleep. And also it means that the yarn doesn't get as disrupted, so it's less likely to have any felting issues. The other thing you need to look out for with felting is make sure that the temperature of the dye that you're pouring onto the yarn is the same temperature as the water that the yarn is in. So that's why I waited until the stock pot of water and yarn was hot to mix my dye bath with boiling water, just so that it wouldn't have cooled down too much. So that's how I got that. And then Joel, I've been wanting to knit a little softie for him, and he's a big fan of octopuses. That is actually the technical plural. I wish it was octopi, but it's octopuses, and I learned that from reading The Soul of the Octopus by Montgomery, which was a really interesting and intriguing book that made me fall in love with octopuses. I heard about that on Tessa Rose Knits, her podcast. I think that's what it's called now. I'll check. Anyway, I don't think she's podcasting right now. I haven't seen her on my subscriptions page in a while because she's busy at college. Focus. Oh, so with that background, I opened Ravelry, and the front page had all these different octopus softies, and I absolutely loved the top left corner one because it looks the most realistic, and especially the knitter had used this great variegated tweedy yarn that just, oh, it looked so incredible. Because one of the magical things about octopuses is that they are masters of camouflage. I'm going to include links below to like videos that deep sea divers have taken of octopuses where it looks just like a rock. They can change their texture, their color, all kinds of things. So obviously I can't do that with knitting. I wish I could. But I really liked the color she had chosen, so I clicked through and I thought the pattern was really neat. And the pattern only cost like $2.50. So I went ahead and bought that with plans to knit Joel and Octopus, and maybe me and Octopus too. So then I was thinking about buying some yarn from Knit Picks because it's their summer sale and I was buying sock yarn for Joel anyway. But then I remembered that not only was I dyeing this yarn already, but I also had a couple skeins of Bartlett yarn in Aran weight that I could over dye as well. So I prefer to knit from stash when possible because then it's free. And so I decided to go ahead and do that. And Joel had requested an orange and green octopus. And the way the pattern is written is it's knit, one color is Aran weight or sport weight held double. And that's like the body and the upper side of the tentacles. What's the right word for that? This side of the tentacles. And then a contrast color is used for the underside of the tentacles. I know that word. And that one is just knit with sport weight held single. So since this was already sport weight and it was already an orange, I decided I would just dye it a more vibrant orange, and that would be the underside of the tentacles. And since I had enough to do two, I decided that I was going to knit myself an octopus as well. So Joel's is going to be green and orange, and mine is going to be like purple, burgundy, magenta colors with the same orange underbelly because that's the colors that I like with orange. And I did some fun experimenting with the skeins that I have dyed up for the octopuses because I've never tried to actually get a variegated yarn before. Usually I prefer kettle dye tonal looks, so it was really interesting and thought I'd talk about it. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but obviously the first step was to make it a brighter orange. So I just mixed up orange as I described to you in the first section, but I mixed it much more concentrated. So I used more of the Kool-Aid and I used more of the Wilton's dye icing. But I wanted to leave some paler bits as well. So I kind of, this isn't a proper skein, but I kind of twisted it around itself so that some of the parts would be more exposed to the dye than others. And I think that that worked really well. I don't know. It just looks like yarn spaghetti, but oh, not in focus yet. Oh, here we go. I'm not sure if you can see that variation. It's not as neat. It's not neon orange, and that's my camera just getting overly excited. But here is the end, and I purposely wrapped that in a little yarn butterfly so that I'd still be able to find it. So you can see the color that the cat was is this, and then I just made it much more vibrant. So that's the cat color. And then I went ahead and this is regular yarn. It's not superwashed, and I think speckles work better on superwash, but I decided to try a speckling method where you just dip the fork in the Kool-Aid powder and then you stab your yarn. And that turned out to be very fun as a process, and it actually worked fairly well. So in order to do this, I took the yarn out of the stock pot where it was very saturated with water and vinegar once it had absorbed all the dye. And I put it at the bottom of another soup pot just to give me more access. A pie plate would work just as well. Anything that's not going to react. And then I just stabbed it as I described. And then I added I let it sit, and then I added a little more water to that soup pot just in case the dye needed help absorbing. And it didn't get me like really dramatic speckles, but that might be the best place to show. Can you see like the little bits of red? So that was a fun experiment, but mainly I just wanted a pretty orange yarn with some red bits in it. So I think this turned out to be a very suitable octopus color, and I'm excited to use it. Although, that's going to be fun to wind. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't check to tie the skein. So the green one is where I got a little more creative. So this one I tied off. So it's a proper skein, and this one isn't dry yet, but so hopefully you can see that that has a lot more variation in it. I think it's prettier in real life, but that's okay. So this started out as a pale green. Let's see. I don't think there's any bits left that are exactly the original color. But a kind of heathery pale green, and Joel likes brighter greens, and you know, you're going to have fun with an octopus. So I started, well, first I tied it off at the 4 sections that you do for control, but then I also took more scrap yarn and tied sections tightly, which usually you don't want to do because then the dye doesn't get in evenly, but because I wanted variation, I thought that might be a good way to get some variation. And I didn't always tie it tightly all the way through. Sometimes I just tied it tightly. Oh, here's one where I didn't rip it off yet. Like I would just pick out a random section and just tie it more snugly. There we go. So hopefully you can see that. And that really did work. I don't know if it'll work on this one. I shouldn't have untied all the other ones in my curiosity. But yeah, so you can see that just where that yarn was untied, can you see? Yep. The yarn is just a slightly different shade because it's reacted to the dye differently. So that was the first thing I did to add some variation. And then I threw it in a dye bath and mixed up some green. I just used Wilton's icing blue and yellow together, and since there was no Kool-Aid, I added more vinegar, and I only added that to the dye. I didn't add it to the stock pot because I wanted this to take more unevenly. So once it was a brighter base green, then I started experimenting with making it darker in spots. So what I did was I took the skein out and I let it cool, and then I wrapped it the way you would a normal skein, tighter than this, but this idea. And then I put it in a soup pot with a very concentrated darker green, maybe that much water, and I just set it in like this. And that way some sections were touching the dye, but a lot weren't. And that's how I got the darker bits. And finally, I tried the same fork method, speckling method on this. Now I thought that if I used red Kool-Aid, since red is green's complementary color, I would get brown speckles, which is what I wanted, but it turns out the red Kool-Aid is very powerful, so instead I got some red speckles. Which, you know, it's a learning process. I think it'll look neat once it's knit up, so I'm not that fussed about it, but that was definitely a surprise. And I went through, I think, about 3 dye baths just to get the color and depth that I wanted. And you can see that some parts are a little more tealy, and then some parts are more mossy, some parts are more like pine green. I just wanted lots of greens, I don't know. So I'm pretty excited to see how this is going to knit up, and it was really neat to experiment with. And finally, I've only just begun my purple one, the process, but here it is, and it started out as a purple. I have photos of the yarn on my stash page before it was dyed, but the purple it was quite close to that. And I started dyeing this, and then I discovered I was almost out of red Kool-Aid. So this, I have only done 1 thing of cherry Kool-Aid and then 2 things of grape. And as you can see, that is not nearly as dark a color as I want. Well, you don't know what color I want, but I'm hoping for a color in the end that's more like this. So I need to get it richer. And these are both blowing out. But yeah, so I just need to get a little bit more red dye. But I told you that the red always seems to strike the fastest. I think that's what it's called when yarn absorbs. And I think you can see that here with just how splotchy it is, because I was going for that look. And so the red color was more than happy to accommodate me. I didn't have to wrap it up and do anything fancy the way that I did for the green yarn. So I think what I'm going to do is put this in a rich dye bath to get it a little bit richer of like a reddish purple. I might just do pure red because it's already got purple in it. We'll see. And then I'm going to wrap it up and do the low immersion method, but just with a blue. So hopefully that'll turn some sections more purple and other sections more magenta. Yeah, I'm really excited to start knitting that pattern. It's the smaller version of a life-size octopus pattern that is free on Knitty, and which I'm very impressed by, but I also know I will never knit that many tentacles. So, but yeah, that's for me. Being able to dye my own yarn is a really fun, cheap hobby, because other than Kool-Aid packets and those 2 pots of icing dye, that's all I've had to buy. Oh, and white vinegar. And because it's food safe, I can use pots that I cook in without worrying about it. I don't need a mask. I don't have to worry about the pets. So and it's just really fun. It's very different from knitting. At least for me, it's much more organic. I'm sure if you're a professional dyer, you do all the measurements and that kind of thing. But I would encourage you to just, if you've got some scrap yarn lying around, get some Kool-Aid and have some fun. If you want richer colors as opposed to kind of the primary Kool-Aid colors, although grape is more complicated, but just add a little bit of the complements. So, and that's the opposite of the color wheel. So it's always going to be, if it's a primary color, it'll be the secondary color that doesn't include that primary color. So like blue is orange, right? Because orange is made out of yellow and red. Yellow is purple, because purple is made out of blue and red. And red is green, because green is made out of blue and yellow. And if it's a secondary color, then it's just the primary color it's missing. So it's pretty easy to track and think about what you need to add to make a more complex, muted color. And usually I get much more of a kettle-dyed look. I think I have to go out of my way to get those more variegated splotchy skeins, which wouldn't worry me in garment knitting, but I'm excited about for Softie knitting. So I don't think you should be too worried about the method. It seems to be fairly straightforward. So I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and now I will talk about my works in progress. Neither of these will surprise you. I talked about them both last week. Other than my Softie knitting, I've just been making slow but steady progress. So the Summer Meadow socks, I have finished the first one. These are out of Knit Pick Stroll in the grass colorway, which is a superwash merino nylon blend, and these are for a friend. I like Stroll for gift socks because it feels soft and smushy, and it's machine washable and dryable. I don't know how it's held up because I've never knit myself a pair of Stroll socks, but at least it looks good on that day. So last time I told you that I was using the blueberry waffle pattern, and that turns out to have been a lie. Here's what it looks like when it's stretched out a bit. So the blueberry waffle pattern is actually knit 2 rounds plain and then knit 2 purl 2 for 2 more rounds. So it's a 4-round repeat, and I just did knit 1 round plain, knit 1 round, knit 2, purl 2. So basically I'm doing garter ribbing. And I'm sure that there's a pattern out there that uses that, but I am not going to search for a pattern for that. I just wrote it on the project details if you're interested. And this is for a friend, as I mentioned, and he wears a men's size 10. And I thought, because I've knit him socks before, I thought I'd knit him socks on 72 stitches, and he likes how they fit. The last pair I knit him was a 3x1 rib pair. So I cast on 72 stitches, and then about this far into the body, I actually looked at that project page and discovered that nope, I had knit that sock on 68 stitches. So I wasn't going to rip back, especially since like ribbing of any kind is very forgiving. So all I did was I did the heel flap over more stitches, and if I'd been thinking I could have just decreased those stitches there, but I didn't. I just did the heel flap over 38 stitches, which left me 34 stitches for the insole. So then I could decrease the gusset down until there were 34 stitches, or instep, sorry, for the sole. So then it became a 68 stitch sock for the foot. Wow, I think I'm trying to talk too quickly. I had some frozen mango as a snack, and I think the sugar is hitting me. And for the toe, he's got longer toes than I do, hence the point, whereas my socks never get to the point. And I used the toe decreases described in a Knitty pattern that is linked to on the project page. I think it's by Kate Atherley, and she describes all kinds of stuff in that article, but the one that I used is the My Favorite Toe. And so it starts with 1 decrease, 3 rows plain, 1 decrease, 2 rows plain, 1 decrease, 2 rows plain, and then every other for 3 decreases, and then every until you get to wherever you want to be. So I went down to 4 on each needle. So I had 8 stitches. I'm lying, I'm looking at it right now, and I went down to 2 on each needle, so 4 stitches total, and then I grafted them. So, no. I keep forgetting. So it does make it quite pointy, but when you put them on, it stretches out more. And yeah, I'm excited with how they look and fit, and I think he'll really like them. Green is one of his favorite colors, and I didn't run out of yarn while knitting this one, so I didn't have to do a contrast toe. I am this far into the second one. I mainly worked on this at the birthday party I went to on Sunday. This is kind of my social knitting at the moment, so I'm trying not to work on it at home, just because I like being able to save it for other things. So I've been working on softies at home, and then my shawl. So this is my project is called The Night is Full of Stars, which is based on one of my favorite Pablo Neruda poems, which is the saddest poem of all. That makes it sound really enjoyable, doesn't it? But it's an excellent poem. I will link to it on the project page in case you are curious and want to read it. Of course, I don't speak Spanish, so I love the English translation. But there's a lot of talk about the night sky in that poem. So the pattern is the Stellastarium, which is a star chart for the Northern Hemisphere, and it makes a pie shawl with beads for each star. And I am much further than I was. I'm around the 57% mark, according to the very helpful spreadsheet that is linked on the pattern page that another Ravelry member created, especially for someone like me who has never knit a pie shawl before, so I have no context for how long, for, proportions. But I'm into the final set of charts, which are the F charts. Whoops, I just popped some stitches off my needle. And my stitch marker. Okay, so I was having a rough time. Oh, focus. There we go. I was having a rough time with this pattern last time I talked to you because it uses charts, and that just seemed like such a hassle to me, whereas if she had just written the instructions out, it would have been so much simpler. So I had started converting the charts into written instructions, and I just write the number of where the bead should be. The pattern calls for a yarn over on the row before the bead, but I'm leaving those out. I prefer the solid fabric. And so all I have to do is write the number where the bead should be for each row, and I just have it in a notes file on my phone. And I am still doing that. I'm converting 10 rounds at a time from the F charts because there are 8 charts to work with. So every time I'm converting, I have to swipe 8 times. But what I do is first I do the 10 rows of chart F1 on my phone. Then I swipe to F2 and I go down and do those rows again. And I do it that way. So I'm only swiping, I'm not blah, blah, blah. So I'm only swiping 8 times in order to convert 10 rows as opposed to doing it row by row swiping, since I don't print things out. And really, it would still be a huge hassle if you were printing. Yeah, so that's, to me, that's a very large drawback of the pattern. I'm not really sure why they made the decision to chart it. It's not my favorite, but the good thing is I'm going to save my tables so that if I knit this as a gift, I won't have to do that again. I will be able to just follow my little tables, and that makes it so much easier to knit. I've also made 2 other changes since last week that have made it incredibly easy to knit as well. Before I made those changes, I wasn't sure if I would get this done in time for a wedding I'm going to in mid-August because it just felt a little bit like pulling teeth. But since I've made those changes, I've been really happy knitting on this, and it's become really enjoyable, and I've actually been working on more than my daily required quota just because it's fun. So 2 changes. First one is I put it on a bigger circular needle. I'm going to lose a bead. Oh well. Anyway. So I did have it on maybe a 24-inch cable. I'm not sure. All the way through charts, the E charts, which are down here. So clearly that was already quite large. And then with F, I finally switched. And I put it on a large cable, and I really wasn't sure how I would feel about that because usually I knit my knitting is all scrunched up because then it goes more smoothly. For me, I can easily move the stitches around, and I knit more quickly. But because this is heavy at this point, I have already knit a full 100-gram skein of yarn into it, and I'm on to my second skein of yarn. It was hurting my wrists and forearms quite a bit, so now, because the cable is longer, I can have almost the full weight of the project sitting in my lap, and very little of the weight is on the needles, which makes it so much easier to knit. The downside is I do have to stop and push the stitches along, because they like to all congregate on the right side of the needles, but that's a very minor downside. So it's a little slower, but it's so much more comfortable on me physically. The other difference I made was I started doing stitch markers. The pattern has you do stitch markers every 72 stitches because that's how big a chart is. Now, I'm not math phobic, but I do live in a base 10 society. Is the focus messed up again? There we go. As I was saying, I live in a base 10 society, so for me, counting by 5s and 10s and 50s and 100s doesn't even require thought. You just look at numbers, right? But counting, so if I lived in a base 12 society, then counting by 72s and 144s would be the equivalent of 50 and 100, but that's not how my brain works. So I realized that there was absolutely no need. So first I was thinking, okay, I'll do stitch markers at the 50 and 100s and then have different stitch markers at the 72, 144, whatever the other ones are, 216, I think. And I'll be able to tell them apart that way, except I don't really have multiple types of stitch markers, and so I wasn't sure how I was going to manage that. And then I realized I'm not using the charts, so I don't need to mark any of those 72 stitch counts. It's not necessary at all for the way that I'm knitting this. And so then I switched to only marking the 50s and the 100s, and suddenly everything became so much simpler. Before that, I was having to count almost every stitch in my head, right? Because I don't know off the top of my head whether 311 is going to be in this section or that section if the sections are by 72 stitches. But I know without even trying to think which section that 311 is between the stitch marker for 300 and the stitch marker for 350. So it just made it so much more intuitive. I would highly recommend doing that if you are going to knit this pattern. And before I was kind of grumbling to myself, but now I can see myself knitting more as gifts because it's so relaxing now. I just have to knit in stockinette, and then I'm only counting at most in like sections of 50. I just glance at my little list of what numbers I need to hit this time, and yeah. So the way that I actually did the stitch markers, just in case you're interested, is I have a brass one as my row counter, so that is 0. There's no way that's going to focus, and that's usually in there, but then I popped off muff, and those are ones I inherited from my great-grandmother, so I love them, but I don't have very many of them. Then for each 50, I'm just using one of my small silver stitch markers. These smooth metal ones are definitely my favorite stitch markers. And so at first I was going to like put 2 large ones and a small one to represent 250, but I found that that was fiddly and wasn't really required. So these are just marking the 50. And then to mark the hundreds, I'm using much larger metal stitch markers. And what I do is for 100 I have 1, for 200 I have 2, and these are both on the cables. Then for the higher hundreds, at first I was going to put them on the cables, but that was kind of making a little loose point. So instead, I've got them attached with a locking stitch marker. So I've got 2 hanging down below and 1 on the cable. For 400, I've got 3 hanging down below and 1 on the cable. And 500, I'm sure you can guess how that's 4 plus 1 on the cable. And I decided to try that and see how it worked. And for me, it's working really well. It's still really easy for me to move them from needle to needle. I don't like having a bunch of stitch markers in my project because it slows me down. But these are fine. And it's also, I wasn't sure how easy it would be to glance at them and see which ones they are, but it's actually really simple, especially since these are larger, so they're a little bit heavier, so I can kind of feel which one is which as well. And those 2 things have made this a really enjoyable project. The only downside now is that my lap is full of wool, and it is in the high 70s to 80s and very humid out. But that, I mean, I just put my fan on and I drink iced drinks, and yeah. The yarn is wool fingering in the Appalachian Stone colorway, and I absolutely love how it's knitting up. I'm knitting it on size 4 needles, so quite loose for a fingering weight because I'm hoping not to have to block it too much. And so I wouldn't use this gauge for a sweater, but oh my gosh, it's beautiful. I definitely want to use this yarn again. It is a superwashed merino, but it's done using a more environmentally friendly superwashing method, and it's made right here in the US. So yeah, and all her colorways are beautiful. And the other fun thing is that this project has matched so many of the outfits that I've been wearing while I knit. So I'm excited. I know it'll go really well with my wardrobe. See, it even matches this dress. The beads I'm using are size 50 Miyazaki triangular foil lined. So I think they're one size larger than the pattern calls for, and they're triangular, and that really helps them pop, which is good because this isn't a super dark yarn. I mean, it's dark, but it's not like a navy blue darkness, but they're very sparkly. So that project has definitely turned around from being kind of the problem child to just an absolute pleasure. And yeah, hopefully I am on track to finish it for the wedding. I still haven't decided for sure what I'm going to do about the edging. The pattern calls for just a 5-stitch garter attached edging, and that will be the easiest to block. I've also been looking at attached edgings on knittingfool.com, which is a free stitch dictionary, and I found one that I really like, and it's not too much wider. I think it's about 8 stitches, so it would use more yarn and it would take more time, but at least it's within the same realm. But since it's a lace one, then I'd have to do a lot more blocking, and I just don't know if I'm going to be able to bend enough for that, because my blocking wires are straight, not curved, or not flexible, they're rigid. So I would have to just do all that via pins, whereas I'm hoping if I do it in just the stockinette with the garter, I could just pat it into a circle. Maybe I'm deluding myself. Let me know, have you ever tried to block just a stockinette garter pie shape without stretching it? Did it work? Because I'd rather do the lace if I'm going to have to do all that work anyway. I like how it looks. But I'd like to hear your input. I also want to see how much yarn I have. Right now I don't think yarn chicken is going to be an issue, but you know, once you're making a bigger border, you do use more yarn. So we shall have to see. Okay. What's up next? I think I will ask for more advice from you and move on to Schrodinger sweater, or in this case, hat, mitts, some kind of accessory. I apologize for the mess that's going on back there that the camera focuses on every time I pop out of frame. So when I was knitting the gnome, it made me go through my leftover stash, and I noticed these 3 yarns, which are a burgundy, a bluey teal, and then a pale pink. And I thought they would be so pretty together. They're fairly similar weights. The pale pink is a little lighter weight, but not too bad. But I don't know what to make with them. Should I make a hat? Should I make mitts? Here they are, just, whoops, as strands. So you can see they're all fairly similar. And I don't knit many multicolored projects, which is weird because I love seeing other people's multicolored projects. I do when it's color work, but I tend to knit solid projects in other contexts, and I feel like that's a shame. I want to knit more multicolored projects, so give me your inspiration. They're between a sport and a DK. What would you knit with them? I know that there's like a color block hat, maybe stripes, maybe a mix of stripes and a little bit of Fair Isle. I've got a reasonable amount of each of them. I think I've got about almost a full, I think I've got about 40 grams of each of these and probably more of this one. So I've got flexibility, but I don't really know what I want. So I would love to hear from you guys, any of your suggestions, and yeah, go from there. Actually, it was Kristen, the last time I was visiting her, the one who I'm giving the gnome, she had this like color blocked hat with like a multicolored pom-pom on it, and I was jealous. So maybe I need to knit something like that. I don't know. What are your thoughts? And speaking of color work, speaking of color work, the final section for the podcast today is going to be a review of Alice Starmore Hebridean 2-ply yarn, which is a yarn. So Alice Starmore is a knitwear designer who also has her own yarn lines, and the yarn is British wool that is manufactured on the Hebridean island that Alice Starmore herself lives on. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. And almost all of them are heathered colors, so they're dyed in the fleece, and then those colored fleeces are mixed together to create absolutely beautiful yarn. I actually happen to have a basket of it because I got all this for Christmas. I know, I'm spoiled. So that yarn I was showing you earlier, that's her yarn. And this is the best example of the heathering. So this is Pebble Beach. And it's just got so many different colors in it. Yeah, all the colors. So this yarn is absolutely beautiful. It's fairly reasonably priced, especially since you can only buy it on her website, Virtual Yarns, but it's free worldwide shipping as long as you spend 25 British pounds, which depending on the exchange rate is usually somewhere around $37 US. And you buy it in 25-gram skeins, which is good for color work, or you can buy it in kits. That's why the basket I showed you is a kit, so some of those looked bigger than 25 grams. It's a fingering weight. It's 2-ply, as the name suggests, and I have knit some color work out of it. It does color work beautifully. So this is a vest that I knit 2 summers ago, pretty sure. Might have been last summer. I need to check these details. Maybe it was last summer. Anyway, the point is I wear this vest a lot. I have found that wool vests are a really good thing for me because I don't get overheated inside with the central heating, but I'm also comfortable outside in them, and this is the only wool vest that I have, so it gets quite a bit of wear. Also, I just think it's absolutely beautiful. It always looks more stripey on camera than it does in person. So as I said, I wear this a lot. I've never worn it next to my skin, but I certainly have worn it a lot over dresses and t-shirts and that kind of stuff. And so it's been subjected to quite a bit of wear, and there are just a few bobbles going on the sides. Can you see right here? Like here. There we go. but they pick off really easily. I haven't tried actually to de-pill this at all. Okay. But yeah, that comes off, and then the fabric beneath looks like it's never been worn. I mean, this is wearing absolutely beautifully. And I also have a hat to show you. So this is also out of her yarn, and this also gets a lot of wear. But you know, hats are less subject to pilling. So I guess I wanted to show you a comparison. So here's the underarm, or the side of the vest, which gets a lot of wear, and here's the top of the hat, which gets almost no wear as far as friction goes, and I think the fabrics look quite similar. So this is a durable yarn. It also is really good at recovering. Like, I can't remember the last time I blocked this, and this is corrugated rib, so it's not as stretchy as real rib, but it still fits my head perfectly fine. The vest hasn't really stretched out much, and I have to pull it on over my shoulders. I'm honestly amazed that, like, nothing is popped because, like, I have to pull really hard to get this over my shoulders. But yeah, and this never comes off. Like, it never falls off my head or anything. So it also holds its shape really beautifully. So I mean, it gets full marks as far as how it wears, durability, sturdiness wise. For me, this is not next to the skin yarn. I mean, certainly not when it's 81 degrees, but even in the winter, I can't wear this next to my bare skin. I went ahead and looked up when I knit the vest and the hat, and they're both from 2016, so they've both gotten 2 winters worth of wear, and like, they're still going perfectly strong. This is one of the things that I wear when I want to feel confident in winter. I wear it with a specific plum-colored dress, and it makes me feel capable, but also quirky. I don't know. It's like armor. But as I was saying before I had to start a new recording segment, this is not next to the skin soft for me. I find that tragic because I want a cardigan out of this yarn. I would love that so much. But unfortunately, that just, for me, I need to layer, and I don't like layering cardigans over long sleeve t-shirts. But the good news is I really like wearing this vest, so I'll just have to knit more vests with it. But yeah, I can't tell you whether it's going to be next to the skin soft for you or not. I would say it's about on par with Jamieson and Smith Shetland and Jamieson Shetland. That kind of feeling. So if those yarns are soft enough to wear next to your skin, then you might have as many problems, might not have problems with it. But for me, this is definitely a hat yarn, or I could see wearing leg warmers because I wear my leg warmers over tights. Vests, as I said, that kit that I got for Christmas, I am going to knit a sleeveless dress out of. So, at some point. So it'll basically be a vest with a skirt because I always wear tights in the winter anyway, so that's definitely doable for me, and that'll be fun. But yeah, anything with sleeves and anything knit related is not going to happen for me because this is one of the most sensitive parts of my skin. And you think, oh, just make it a 3/4 sleeve sweater, but really all of my arms, right here too, it will just start itching like crazy. But I can wear this over a long sleeve t-shirt without any problems. There are other yarns where even if I wear a t-shirt between me and it, I still get itchy, but not this yarn. So this is very wearable for me, just as long as I take into account those considerations. And as I said, it is fairly affordable. I'm pretty sure it's cheaper than both the Shetland yarns I just mentioned for Americans. I don't know about for other countries, but that free shipping makes a big difference. And, oh, I should have looked up how much each skein is. I want to say it's it depends on the exchange rate too, between $3 and $3.50 a skein. So let's go with $3.50. So that makes it $7 for a 50-gram skein. So a little less than Quince & Company Finch yarn as far as that goes. So. And the other thing is I love the kind of fabric it makes, both the vest and the hat. They keep me incredibly warm, but not in an overheating kind of way. I don't know. like everyone talks about how wool is both breathable as well as insulating, and how it magically keeps you at the temperature you want to be at. And in my experience, I'm often overheated in wool, so I wish that I had the experience that all those people talk about, you know. But I would say this yarn is the closest for me as far as, well, I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, it depends. But this yarn for me definitely hits that sweet point between insulating but not overly warm, and even on really cold days, even though it's fingering weight, and granted stranding increases that thickness but not by too much, but on really cold days I can still wear this hat as a winter hat and have it protecting my ears and keeping me nice and warm, when several of my other fingering weight hats are more transitional weather, spring and autumn. And then in winter I'll switch to worsted weight. But this one works through all the seasons. So I love this yarn. It comes in beautiful colors. It does have a more limited color range. There aren't any true grays. Yeah, but for me, I like that because it forces me to be more creative in my color pairings. There aren't really any neutrals, and so I end up with more interesting color combinations. And I think it just, because I use the heathered ones, I mean, this is sort of a neutral. That's the closest you're going to get. This is, is it Softie? Yeah, it's Softie. And you can see it's very heathered. There we go. So yeah, I think this vest has 8 different colors in it. I love her yarn. I'm really excited that I got more of it for Christmas. And I actually have been thinking I need to knit another colorwork hat out of her yarn, but with reds. And when I said this was my only vest, I lied. I knit another vest out of this yarn. But I made it open front, and then I was playing serious yarn chicken, and so it has some issues that have rendered it unwearable for me. But I have a plan to fix that, and I will talk about that more on the next episode, because for me, August is going to be the evaluating all of my knitwear, deciding what I want to keep, what I need to fix, what I want to frog and reclaim the yarn, and I would love it if you would join me. So, I think that's pretty much everything. If you are interested in this gnome pattern, if you're interested in knitting one of them, Sarah, the designer, and I are planning to run a knit along. We haven't sorted out all the details yet, so I can't give them to you. She's so cute, I need one. Anyway, but that is on the future horizon, and we're going to try to get that started pretty soon. And I know that Sarah will be giving away one of her gnome patterns as a prize, either her first one, if you don't have it, or a future one. So if you have been wanting to knit a gnome, but there's not an urgency about it, you might want to hold off for another week or two, just so that we can, you know, include you in the knit along. And that is everything. If you would like to find me in between podcast episodes, I'm the Charm of It on Instagram and Ravelry. I'm very more active on Instagram than Ravelry. I love to hear from you, whether it's comments here on YouTube or on Ravelry or on Instagram, and I'm working really hard to start answering them all in a timely manner again. I'm starting to get back into the routine of podcasting. So I always read them and appreciate all of them. So I'm grateful. Whether I reply or not, I'm an equal amount of grateful. And thank you for bearing with me. I don't have Moth or Thistle to say goodbye the way that I used to. I'm sorry about that. Moth tends to nap in the closet during the day now, and Thistle isn't allowed to jump up and down off the furniture, so she's over on the couch sleeping, and I can't just call her to me. But hopefully you just enjoy me saying goodbye, and I should see you again in another week. Take care.